All right, welcome one, welcome all. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 20, The Politics in the Gilded Age. The previous couple of chapters, we were discussing the rise of urbanization, the change in sort of the political situation of the United States at the sort of closer turn to the century. And we covered a couple of sort of Gilded Age topics already. So we're going to review a couple of things that we've already discussed in terms of, let's say, the origin of Gilded Age, Mark Twain, etc., and kind of move forward. Tammany Hall and the rest of it is kind of left behind in previous chapters. However, the Gilded Age in its entirety, and we're going to get into it a little bit more heavily and deeper in a second, but it was known for its corruption. It was known for large money and business interests influencing U.S. politics all the way up to the federal level, including states and, of course, local municipalities as well. And so I love teaching about the Gilded Age because it has such strong comparisons to the modern day today with very similar issues such as growing income inequality, larger divisions between workers and, let's say, business owners or the sort of wealthy monopoly type of folks, right? And so hopefully we can understand and gauge the various sort of historical relevances here and extrapolate that to the modern day so we can make some wise and informed decisions. So a couple sections we're going to be going over, discussing, political corruption. We're going to be discussing some of the political issues in terms of patronage and, let's say, gold systems. A few slides on the populist era and some rising populist movements and some labor and unrest due to this rising populist movement as well. And the populist movements, just as a short recap here, is going to be the antithesis, is going to be the kryptonite of the rising large business owners who want to extrapolate as much money and funds and income as they can from the poor workers. And so it is a system trying to balance itself out, essentially, right? And so without further ado, let's start part one, political corruption. So the Gilded Age in its entirety, where did it get its name from? What historical era did it comprise? So it comprises the late 19th century or the late 1800s, as we all know. And in previous sections, we saw the, very quick, rapid progression of modernization, right? The rise of business, the rise of factories and sort of assembly lines, the rise of urbanization in cities, right? And sort of large migrants and millions of people from around the world coming to the shores of the United States looking for a better life, cities getting overcrowded, right? That's the kind of lifestyle we're talking about during these decades here. And so as the United States keeps growing, the Gilded Age, as we talked about before, starts to turn into this sort of corrupted age, right? Where money rules all. You could buy out politicians and influence elections and all of these various things. But the very famous author, the American author Mark Twain, in one of his books titled The Gilded Age, he sort of coined the term. And so, the reason he said gilded and nicknamed it Gilded Age is because at the time, and even today, I suppose, the term gilded means it is covered in gold or a precious metal and source. However, the commentary and critique he was making in the Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, his book, was that, anything can be gilded with gold, right? I could go out to the market right now and buy myself like a nice, beautiful gold chain. However, you have no idea what's inside. Is the chain 100% pure gold, or is it just kind of coated with some lovely gold? But the inside is just very poor, rusty metal, right? But you sort of just flamboyantly dress it up to make it look nice. And so his commentary and critique here was that the Gilded Age, in U.S. history here, on the face of it, it looked beautiful and wonderful and nice. The U.S. was prospering and buildings were, turning into skyscrapers and entire cities are being erected. However, at the center, it's rotting away, right? U.S., the center of sort of American life, is becoming grotesque. So that's sort of the commentary he was making here. He also made a bid to discuss some of the machine politics which we talked about previously with Tammany Hall and the various corruption in New York, where, New York was one of the largest sort of corruption rings, in the United States at the time. That was not just isolated in New York. That was also prevalent throughout other areas of the U.S., but that was the most famous example that we have for today. And so, once again, corruption, right? Seething into every type of possible, fabric of society, even going all the way up to our congressional representatives, right? The federal government. Big businesses, and remind me if you have heard this type of thing before, today in the modern age. Big businesses, through donations and campaign financing and sourcing, started to get political favors from people elected into office. Does that sound familiar? Does that ring a bell? I hope so. The only difference from this period of time to today is that they passed various laws, like anti-bribery corruption laws. However, modernly, the companies just said, hey, we're not donating money to this particular individual. We have our lobbyist, Kevin, and Kevin is going to march and just give them the money on our behalf. Technically legal, but it's the same darn thing. So they need to start closing the loopholes. My personal opinion, lobbying needs to end. Otherwise, the U.S. is going to be the new Gilded Age once again, indeed. And so, his commentary and critique, especially a couple of the pages here, were absolutely hilarious because, here he was giving a couple of illustrations, right? And figures. How much does it cost to actually bribe someone over, right? And so, like, a female lobbyist support was set at around $10,000. A U.S. senator could be bought off for around $3,000. So, it's at this point in time, everyone knew exactly what was going on. But for Mark Twain to blatantly put illustrations and put a price tag on exactly who can get bought out, I mean, that was just scandalous, if you will. The cojones on the man. So you gotta wish Mark Twain, all the respect that he deserves here. But he's not wrong. I mean, the center of all of his commentary and critique was that America had become so corrupt and materialistic with wealth that the rich were able to just buy their way in, right? And so, he was taking pot shots at obviously the government, Washington, D.C., probably some, minor state municipalities, etc. But overall, in general, I suppose he was trying to make a critique of America in, as a whole, saying that materialism, money, has set into our souls. No longer are the virtues of being an American based off of, let's say, respect, hard work, individualism, ingenuity, although that, of course, was still there. But now materialism and finances have gone into the top three, right? And so he's making a comment saying, what happened to us Americans, right? How did we let us dive into such a foolish position of allowing such corruption to seed into our lives? And, here we put a primary source from his actual book, what is interesting to read. And so in it, he says, and I kind of underlined a couple of important bits, where, it's a back and forth as a conversations on, let's say, congressional bribes, right? And here, the people are sort of going back and forth in their discussion saying, oh, maybe 4 or 5 dozen for taking bribes to vote. Just casually saying, we'll take bribes and we'll vote whatever way you want, right? And then the second paragraph in the bottom is like, you can't expect immortal purity all the time. It's not in nature. Essentially saying that people cannot be 100% pure for their entirety of their lives, right? At a certain point, you gotta look the other way, grease a few elbows, try to claw your way into some, power grab, right? And so he's commenting here from his characters, right, having this discourse, and it gives a wonderful sort of view of, yes, there's bribery and there's corruption, but also that he's trying to comment and critique human nature itself, right? So perhaps he's saying inevitably all governments or all societies start to turn corrupt after a while. So who knows? And then he continues on here for like part 2 of the quote I wanted to say, saying that we have sale of appointments to West Point cadetships. West Point is this famous sort of military base where they train some of the best warriors in the United States, and saying, yeah, you could just buy your way in or buy your son's way in. And the very last place I underlined. So Congress always lies, helpless in quarantine, 10 weeks of a session. That's encouraging. That kind of comments on how during various sessions that Congress has, they do take breaks and they take vacations. And so, part of those breaks and vacations are to go off and campaign for more money, and to schmooze, right, at balls and dinners, and to beg and plead for more money. And so, that's an encouraging bit. Says, well, number one, they're not working as the government officials should be in Congress. And number two, they're probably just schmoozing their way for more money. So double critique there. And all of this conversation of corruption, of trying to have this Gilded Age and sort of this rot in the middle, it is exemplified by the election of 1876, nicknamed a bloody affair. Not necessarily because of actual blood all the time, although some blood maybe, but a nice sort of nickname nonetheless. So this particular election, and you don't have to go through and remember specifically that it was Hayes versus Tilden, but it was a Republican versus Democrat, as typically we do have. And so it was a presidential election, and a couple years prior, 1873 was the first major economic recession that the United States had ever had, right, since its inception. So people were sort of feeling the pinch, right? Money was unstable. The economy was a little unstable. So there was politics was in flux a little bit at this time. And so a big conversation piece was starting to talk about money, and we're going to get into this a little bit after as well, in terms of, let's say, hard money or currency backed by gold/silver, right, standards to protect it from inflation. And then let's say the counter argument to that would be, oh, well, we don't necessarily want the US dollar backed by gold. We want it to, let's say, be off of that standard so we can inflate it more, build the economy up quicker, etc. We're going to kind of leave that topic to sort of the end, but just keep that in your mind. These kind of conversations about money and currency, because of the economic downturn, are definitely sort of in play. And a big conversation piece here also was the civil service. The reason, and we studied this a little bit previously, but the civil service conversation was very important because at this point in time, the old system that had sort of established itself, and this goes back to like the 1820s. So this is sort of past our class's time stamp, right, and the scope of our class, but a little history lesson. In the 1820s, Andrew Jackson, the main squeeze on the $20 US bill, he created what is called a spoils system, where he got in his friends and all these political appointments, right, just because they were buddies. And that's a very dangerous thing, because you essentially place people into positions of power, right, very important positions of power and cabinet positions, when they don't deserve it. They're just, your friends. And you're just giving them a very quick, easy way up. So the conversation remains here, right? After years and decades of this sort of spoils system advancing itself in U.S. politics, the conversation of civil service saying we have to put people in these very important positions based off of merit, not favoritism. Merit being, you are meritorious. You earned, right, your position, right? You are worthy of it, right? So for example, someone has to pass various aptitude tests or have the experience, right, to be in that position. Not necessarily, oh, this is Jackson's cousin. Did he graduate from university? No, he doesn't like to read much. Oh, okay. Does he have any governmental experience? No, he's been home with mama. And then Jackson's cousin is just like, just standing there useless. And then Jackson says, that's fine, spoil system. Just get him in there. So we don't want that, right? We want, hopefully, in an ideal scenario and world, government to be functioning in a good, healthy, productive way. That's the ideal. It never, actually reaches it. Government can be very ineffectual, but that's a more modern conversation. And so Hayes and Tilden, right, the two candidates here, they're sort of going back and forth. Hayes says publicly, I have no political scandals in the past. I am a very virtuous person, right? So you have to vote for me. Tilden says, who cares about that? I am a self-made millionaire. I've made it big in business. And this should sound very familiar because similar to Donald Trump, or even, let's say, what is the Utah man, the Mormon who ran for president of the Republicans? His name escapes me now. He was running against Obama. But, a lot of the modern arguments in politics are also that, because we sort of idealize money and billionaires in today's world, a lot of people say, well, I'm a self-made millionaire and I know how to run a business. I'll run America like a business and it'll be great. So they're making very similar arguments here, saying I will be a very successful politician because I will fight corruption because I know exactly where corruption is because I work in business, right? I know who greases whose palms and I'll try to, limit it. And so inevitably we get what is known as the Bloody Shirt campaign. And this is a very sadistic situation because, so as I say here, the strategy of Republican candidates to stress the sacrifices that the nation had to endure in a civil war against democratic secessionists, etc. Essentially, what the Bloody Shirt campaign was, it was a sort of backhanded deal where the Republicans would finally end Reconstruction. They would take all troops out of, the South, and they would just stop whatever they were doing in the South. And Democrats had full reign over the South. The South at this point in time was very democratic. And so the Democrats enlisted the KKK and other sort of terrorist, domestic terrorist groups, started to assault black voters and others if they wanted to vote Republican. So they made a very kind of sneaky-handed betrayal here. And so getting into a little more detail here, and I love the sort of image on the right-hand side, right? Sort of a very Lucifero devil type of situation, right? And so as Hayes and Tilden were, battling it out and duking it out, here's the deal I was speaking of. So Republicans would withdraw all troops from the South, ending Reconstruction. And if any of you want a recount or a reminder, Reconstruction was the post-Civil War years where Republicans in the North was trying to rebuild the South, but also reintegrate African Americans. Not reintegrate, integrate African Americans for the first time, truly as citizens to the United States. So this is a very important time. And Reconstruction needed longer to simmer. And so they kind of shook hands behind, closed doors and said, fine, the Republicans are going to withdraw their troops, but our guy, the Republican, is going to win the presidential race. And that's exactly what happened. African Americans and intellectuals still refer to this as the Great Betrayal, right? Because Reconstruction was that key moment right after the Civil War and slavery was ended, where that was the best and perfect time to sort of bolster up the community, right? And kind of set them on the right foot, or give them land, or give them mules, or whatever they needed at the time, to kind of get a nice head start into the American system. And so cutting that off prematurely stunted economic growth greatly. And so the Republican Party leader is the one being shown as Lucifero, right on the right-hand side, sort of the devil, if you will. And Hayes, the Republican president that ended up winning, walks off with this lady here who's supposed to represent the election, right? So he's sort of like walking off with his prize, winning the election. And so I love these old political cartoons. They're so spot on. And so some more sort of drawings here. Tilden or blood, right? Sort of denoting a lot of the, sort of backhanded KKK like terrorist tactics that they were going to unleash. And then in the back, if you can read, the bloody age of the U.S., the slavery period, Civil War, Reconstruction, and next, have we not had enough? And then KKKs on the bottom with the skull. So a lot of these kind of themes are still intermixed in the sort of political cartoon ideology at the time. Here's a great short video for you to watch on voter fraud, suppression, and partisanship about this election in particular. So this is a great little watch. It's a few minutes long. It's 8-9 minutes long in total, but it gives you a nice sort of recount of exactly sort of what was happening, what people's goals and aspirations were, and kind of, brings it a little bit more into context for you. Part 2, the key political issues. So let's get into a couple of these sort of sub points. And then here, you don't necessarily have to remember this slide and portion too much. This is sort of me giving that historical backdrop of this spoil system that I talked about earlier. So if you are interested, this is a little bit more of like early U.S. history from the 1820s. But if you are interested, this is sort of discussing the spoil system and sort of his rotation in office and getting his buddies and those loyal to him and positions of power, right, within the federal government. So if you would like, read this, and this is the beginning of this very unhealthy relationship between government officials, their friends and lackeys, and sort of this perpetual boys' club, if you will, on Capitol Hill, instead of like the civil service argument that's going to pop up in the Gilded Age, as we saw a couple slides ago, saying this does not work. We need a merit-based system. We need competent people, right, to be at the head of the ship instead of Kevin. Sorry if there's any Kevins in class, but and so a couple of imagery here. Jackson on the left-hand side, sort of riding his pig, with dollar signs denoting all of the greed and bribery and fraud, plundering the U.S. system for all it's worth. On the right-hand side, sort of him sitting with his cabinet members, but his cabinet members are his close friends and allies. So, it's sort of, like I said, a boys' club, if you will. And so this slide starting is very important. Kind of going back to the meat of the lecture. Giving a sort of comparison between spoil system and the civil service reform that they wanted to do. So, in terms of that sort of 1820s, Jacksonian democracy, as they called it. This is Jackson's spoils system, right? Him getting all of his political lackeys into power, which also was actually at the time a very successful method because he sort of pushed this new democratic wave of getting more and more people in the U.S. to vote. But, there's always pros and cons to these things. And so, the Jacksonian democratic method, or the spoils system, if you will, was sort of growing and festering for a number of decades. And so once the civil service reform started to come into the picture, once again, they wanted meritocracy, right? To elevate people of worth, of intelligence, of capability into these large, powerful positions that are going to dictate federal, state, and local governance, right? Very important things. And so, in the early 1870s, they started to, create this sort of liberal Republican Party to try to unseat Grant at the time, and try to really kind of hone in, their version of the argument, saying that corruption was a great evil of the United States that has rotten and seethed itself into our very soul, which, once again, we could, if we're extrapolating this to the modern day and age, completely true. So history sometimes repeats itself, but most of the time, as Mark Twain said, history rhymes. And so when we're getting closer and closer towards the presidential election of 76 with President Hayes, that great betrayal we were talking about with that devil Lucifero sort of image on the right-hand side, since the Republican president nominee Hayes ended up winning because of the great betrayal, and the Democrats got full control of the South and Reconstruction ended, etc. Now, the president of the United States, President Hayes, the Republican, now owes huge favors to the Republican Party leaders because they are the ones that got him voted into power, right, from those shady deals that they made. And so they came to him and said, listen, we want to continue the spoils system. We want to continue this trend. You owe us, right? Sort of a very mafia-esque like discussion, if you will. And so, although Hayes was not able to pass as many things as he wanted to in his terms, he did a couple of good things. First, he adopted some new patronage rules, essentially, trying to limit the amount of money and financing. That's what sort of patronage stands for, limiting how much money goes into political campaigns and financing, so it can't just be as unlimited as before. But it wasn't strict language, but he tried to at least reform it. Declared that these party leaders, whether Democratic or Republican now, had no say in political appointments, which was huge. They cannot randomly go to the president of the United States and say, hey, you're going to vote this person in, because that's spoils system 101, right? And then that government appointees could not manage political appointees. Very similar to the previous point, just saying that whoever works in the government at this very moment could not have the sole management of political appointees based off of their whim. It should be a more sort of collective practice, right? It cannot be just me sitting there and trying to get my nephew Kevin, right, into office. Good old Kevin. It's cut out for public service, but just get in there. It's a safe job. And so, yeah, at least give Hayes his due credit. He tried, right? He tried to move the needle a little bit closer to the right direction. Now, this is an interesting sort of moment in U.S. history when President Garfield, had blows with assassination attempts. And so this was by Charles Guiteau, who's a lawyer and supporter of the Republicans for a while. And he was a little crazy. So he gave a number of very fiery, impassioned speeches to, small to medium-sized crowds. He was doing his part in the middle of a political campaign. And so his Republican nominee, Garfield, right, soon to be President Garfield, he won the election. He had it in his head that, oh, man, I'm the one who got him into office because of me and my speeches to, those 12 people in the courtyard and Kevin over there. Because of my hard work, he got the presidency. He sort of just had these grandiose delusions in his mind. So after the election was over, Guiteau goes up to the new president and says, hey, this is very sort of spoils system-esque, says, hey, I helped you out, brother. I want an ambassadorship, right? A very nice, prestigious foreign policy role. I want an ambassadorship for my hard work here. And then Garfield just kind of went, shoo, peasant, He did not really want much to deal with him because he's like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to give you an ambassadorship. Like, who are you? And so Guiteau, was down on his luck, didn't have too much cash on hand. Pretty angry and pissed off the president from all of his delusions that, like, he betrayed me. I helped him get into office, and he's not giving me my ambassadorship. And so he was planning on killing the president of the United States. So he planned, he got some weapons, got some dynamite, got some sort of machetes and knives, got a couple of guns, right? And so, eventually saying, I want to do it like an American, right? Whatever that's supposed to mean. And so he was like tailing the president around the Capitol, right, as the president of the U.S. was walking around. And to his credit, like nice guy, Guiteau, I suppose, he saw plenty of opportunities to just go up and kill the president. But his wife and or son were there plenty of time, so he did not want to kill the president of the U.S. in front of his family. And so he eventually just kind of backed off from tailing them and then wrote a letter to the White House, I need to save the Republican Party, save the Republic itself. And then later on, he finally kind of found the president, cornered him at a later date, shot him in the back, So truly, kind of like, the old saying, like, oh, I just got stabbed in the back. No, he got shot in the back. It's even worse. And so, the president ended up dying, of course, because, having this huge lead bullet just pierce your back and explode through the front, right? Having like this huge gaping hole in your front chest. Obviously, that's going to, wreck your day. So the president died shortly after. And of course, when they're trying Gatu in the courtroom, he's eccentric, he's loud, he's just acting sporadic and crazy, right? The dude was off his rocker, and so he was like quoting poetry, using religious arguments with God and the Republic and America he wants to save, all these various things. It probably would have been a very fun sight to behold if you're an attorney in the courtroom. And then he famously said, he defended himself in court saying, "The doctors killed Garfield. I just shot him." Sure, buddy. Sure. And so, yeah, of course, he was convicted and hanged later for his treason. So this is just a funny little side segment to the spoil system and how it can go terribly awry if somebody within that supposed spoil system is a little bit hell-bent. They're just, a few screws loose, and think that they are owed the world and they have access to guns to shoot the president of the U.S. So, just saying, spoil system might not be the best thing going forward. And so I love this image because it sort of denotes Garfield. Yes, Garfield, here got shot. He's the guy sort of like bending over and doing some like dance move or whatever, but it just seems like he's doing like this, weird dance move. I think they could have represented it a little bit better, but that's just my opinion. Alrighty, let's start on the populist era, right? Now that we talked about corruption, the spoil system, getting good old Kevin into the cabinet positions, as things were getting a little more insidious with money and income inequality and all these various things because of the height of the Gilded Age. Some counter movements were populist movements. And so the reason they got their name was they were populist. They were for the people, right? For popular governance, right? Trying to have various measures and legislations and reforms for the best, intent of the people of the U.S. in general, not just, let's say, the best intent for the highly rich of the United States. And so starting, right, with the good old farmers, right, because farmers are the backbone of the U.S. economy, always have been, always will be. I don't care how much money you make. You need water and food to survive. If you don't have one of those, you will die. Well, whether you're a poor, middle class, or rich, like Scrooge McDuck. And so the good old farmers, they were struggling a bit. Because, money was kind of fluctuating here and there, especially, later on with the 1873 economic recession that I talked about. Things were getting a little bit, worse in terms of pricing and inflation and stuff. And so they started to notice that their wares, their products, their produce is not selling as well as it used to. And so, the farmers need to make a living too. And so during the last sort of years of the 19th century, the last years of the 1800s, farmers were finding more and more that their pricing was falling for the goods they were selling. Governmental tariffs were making it more difficult to buy and sell things that they needed. And there was increased sort of competition from abroad on food. And so, they were very unhappy. They started, not getting enough money for their sales. There was a bit of overproduction as well, especially with foreign food and investment coming in. And so pricing was, not as good as it should have been. And so here, an interesting question. Remember I said during our whole gold currency conversation, kind of mentally keep that in the back of your head. That's where this comes in. And slowly will get more and more, important as the slides go on. But here, the farmers are advocating for inflation to rise. They want inflation. The reason being is because inflation of a currency, right, such as the US dollar, inflation allows for the economy to grow faster. Because with inflation, right, you need more of that currency. You need more US dollars to purchase X, Y, and Z goods. However, because the farmers were having such low cash on hand, they said, hey, like inflation will be a good thing for us because then there'll be more money circulated through the economy so we can actually have, more cash on hand. So yes, things might be a little bit more expensive moving forward, but at least it'll give us like a huge like sort of early influx of finances. And so they were really trying to push for this, right? Even organizing their first sort of, farmers organization called the Grange, growing up to 1.5 million members. That is not too shabby, right? 1.5 million members this day and age through the collective farmers associations. That's pretty good. And interestingly enough, they did a very sort of like Reddit or perhaps GameStop type of scenario where they wanted to pool their resources and collectively sort of have these large bargaining agreements with states and federal government, right, for better rates, pricing, and supply. So I suppose this is an early effort for them to have some type of like farmers union, right, or some marketers, sort of like a market negotiator, right? They're trying to stand up for themselves in these things, which is great. So that early on Grange eventually formed and manifested itself into what is known as the Farmers Alliance, a little bit more of a formalized version of it. And so now, by around 1890, the membership grew to over 2.5 million, both white and black, because everyone, there's still many, many farmers in the United States at this point, right? Most of the population of the U.S. still lives in rural farms, but we are slowly kind of seeing the migration from farms and rural lands into cities. But still, many, many people are living and trying to make a good, honest, hard work living in the fields. And so white and black both getting into support, right? Having multiracial support. Also comprised of 250,000 women, right, in this Farmers Alliance. And so they were joining in because they were sharing an interest in obviously their husbands and their own farms a lot of times, right, because the situation was not getting better. And of course, if you're the mother of a few kids on the farm, right, and the wife of your husband, and he's out with the kids and toiling all day and doing whatever they need to do, you obviously want everyone to succeed. It's a family, strong, nuclear family unit. And so they're joining in the droves as well. And so the women that were joining the Farmers Alliance here, they were promised by the alliance themselves that if things go well and their negotiations are fruitful, that they will also try to push for more political rights, women's suffrage on the national level, all these various things. Because, you can't really, if you are an organization or some type of membership, you have to get to a certain level of importance before you can really start to push these large issues, right? If you only have a membership of 50,000 people total in the U.S., you're not going to get much done. Your voice is not as loud. Let's say you have a membership of tens of millions. Well, things can start to change, right? With numbers, your voice becomes strong and solidified. And so the good old alliance with its various flags here, kind of denoting or looking a little bit similar to the Confederate flag. So, I don't take too much of a good liking to it, but, whoever was in charge of the flag banners, God help them. And then all these various posters, right? Farmers Alliance, the picnic, People's Party picnic here, trying to just, rally people, get them to meet and join together for, town hall meetings, outdoor meetings, right? Kind of to get membership going. Here's an interesting part in connection to the 250,000 plus women that were joining into the Farmers Alliance. Here is a link to Connor Prairie's, right? Women and the law in the early 19th century. And so it gives a sort of detailed discussion, with, a woman's gender, her marital status, legal standing in America, right? Over, a few decades of the 1800s. And they cover very important topics, such as married couple customs, legality, divorce, voting rights, property rights, abortion, morality, crime and punishment. So if you are, a little more inclined to research and study a little more of women's history, this is a little bit of an insight onto sort of the progression of women's history during the 19th century. Not a fully complete topic, because you could have an entire class on this subject, obviously. But, just, for me to throw in some additional sort of research here, if you feel inclined to kind of do a little extra digging. And of course, we have the sort of supporters of the Farmers Alliance and a couple of the sort of early, women's suffragettes, right, trying to push for gender equality in the U.S. And then here, with our resident, wonderful historian, John Green, right, the one, the only. So he gives a nice little crash course here of 13 minutes or less on women in the 19th century. So he always does a fantastic job, and whoever's in charge of his research and doing his little graphics, they always do a top-notch job. So I highly recommend for you to watch this. It gives you a nice sort of backdrop into more of the sort of ins and outs, right, of a lot of the movements, and he kind of puts it together in a nice consolidated way. Alrighty, part 4, social and labor unrest in the 90s. The good old 90s. So, power to the people. I'm going to take one last swig of caffeine. So far, we've had the Gilded Age being this moment of corruption in politics, but also with business and money and corporations. And we've had a slight backlash to that with farmers' alliances, with President Hayes trying to get more meritocracy in the federal government, right? We have a little bit of a pushback. And one of the major events of the 90s to truly exemplify the sort of income inequality, the rich versus the poor, the hard wage earner sweating in, let's say, steel mills versus the white collar manager upstairs drinking whiskey and smoking a cigar type of situation, was the Homestead Strike in 1892. And so if you ever heard of Andrew Carnegie, which hopefully you have in our previous lectures, Andrew Carnegie built the U.S. steel production in the United States for a good few decades, right, in the 19th century. Because of him, skyscrapers were built, railroads were built, steel was made and cranked out in abundance. And so Carnegie was one of the richest robber barons in this century. He was wealthy beyond belief. And so he ended up hiring this man called Henry Frick. And so Frick, and, I'm trying not to mispronounce it. It's F-R-I-C-K, so Frick. So Mr. Frick was a very heavy-handed manager. He was a no BS type of manager. He wanted you to work and for you to do what you're told. If you don't like it, get the heck out. I'll find someone else who wants to do the job. And so there was inevitably a sort of union rights protest, I suppose, right, at one of the factories at Homestead. And so they were striking. They were saying, hey, we're not getting paid enough. Like, the hours are terrible. Like, we need a little bit more pay, right? This is just, you're paying us pennies. Like, we can't, support our families like this. And they wanted to unionize. So they were striking. They had picket fencing, all of that stuff. So Henry Frick hired a lot of policemen, militiamen, and local sort of thugs and gangs for hire. And all of them together collectively sort of kicked butt for all of these workers outside of the protest. And later on, even the court systems ended up siding to a certain extent with the corporations because they did not want to hear any grievances about this, right? So it goes to show you that there's a lot of sort of sector play here, right, in different fields. So whether it's business to courtrooms and vice versa, they are sort of talking with each other and have an understanding. And so this is very sad to see because essentially this situation showed the United States that corporations and the very rich and elite could get away with, beating up the working populace and saying, you want to unionize? Boom, boom, boom. Just smack them a few times and no one's going to do anything, right? So it sets the tone for America. And I think in the wrong way, right? It exemplifies the evils of Gilded Age. It does not exemplify American virtue and hard work and individualism and everything that the U.S. was built and founded on, right? This is sort of it gone terribly wrong. And so the farming problem, right, this farmers alliance that we talked about already, right, very previously, they were also at this point in time, as we pointed out, trying to have this alliance. This alliance was, as we said, couple million individuals large. By 1890, it was stretching across 43 states, which is a really impressive thing if you think about it, especially during this time period, right? There's no social media, no internet. To get people spread across 43 states to really, believe your vision, that's pretty impressive. So their demands, right, as this alliance of a couple million farmers, was that they wanted Congress to specifically enact legislation that would allow better storage of food, because this is important. If there's large storage facilities, the farmers can sell product to the government for them to store there if they have surplus and extra food. So the government has all this extra food on hand if they need it for whatever reason, and the farmers get paid for their food and all their hard work and toil. They wanted better loans and interest rates, right? Because a lot of times, right, if you're a farmer, you need to buy all of these equipments, right, and maybe get an oxen or two, or some horses, right, or some plows or whatever. And sometimes you got to buy it on credit. You got to ask the bank for a loan. So they wanted better loans and rates, because once again, you're farmers. People need food and water to survive. If you don't have one of those two, you're going to die. So, it would behoove every modern nation in the world to treat your farmers with respect. They grow your food. Modern side note, treat those who pick the food with respect as well, right? Back-breaking jobs. And so, this alliance was important because it was trying to help and advocate for the people on the ground, for the people that seemingly did not have a voice for themselves, trying to give better sort of political advocation, right? On the left-hand side, can give you perhaps some type of visual of the Homestead strike at Carnegie's Mill, with the strikers and workers up top. And as you can see over here in the bottom, all of these troops and militia with bayonets and guns and clubs marching upward to beat the living hell out of the protesters, which is not what America was built on, folks, right? On the right-hand side, we have this poster, which, there's so much imagery here. So in the poster, if you look on the left-hand side, those are the hired guns, right? They're firing into the poor the workers that are striking. And then above it, in the smoke, is this protection, and this sort of the Grim Reaper comes out of nowhere. So is it really for protection, or is it just there are a bunch of hired goons and thugs that are just shooting into this helpless mob that are just trying to voice their disgruntledness, right, over the working situation, which was terrible. Let me put it into perspective. If any of you have felt, like on a very hot day, let's say your air conditioning breaks and it's like 105 degrees in Los Angeles, right? It's just boiling. You're sweating. You feel terrible. You're just sticky. A lot of these hardworking men would be working in steel mills, which means you need to fire the furnaces and keep them lit with coal. So number one, you're smoking, you're breathing in all this coal and dust. The temperatures are just rising through the roof. You're standing right next to hot flame all day. And then all of the iron ore needs to be processed and refined. And if you've seen any of those movies, right, they have like these large cylinders and barrels where they have all the iron ore that gets melted and smelted and turned into steel. And then you have to slowly turn it and pour it into these various sort of like, pathways to make, let's say, all the brackets and bracing and whatever, you want to convert the steel into, right? Let's say for all these building materials for railroads or bridges or whatever. And so you're once again standing essentially next to hot lava, right? Back-breaking labor, very difficult. And so, you would think you get paid well for that, but they were just trying to pay them as little as possible for that type of work. So, of course, they're going to try to, revolt and rebel. And on the bottom here, I absolutely hate this. It said, the American people know a good thing when they see it. Heartiest congratulations. You deserve this triumph, Andrew Carnegie. So I mean, I can't tell for sure. I think this is supposed to be a sort of satirical, commentary. I hope it is, right? Saying, oh, this is a great thing, right? Congratulations, Andrew Carnegie, you won this one. I'm pretty sure it is a satirical comment, right? Satirical means like obviously it's a joke. They don't exactly mean congratulations. I would suppose, especially with the imagery here, with the Grim Reaper and the protection and the shooting of the innocents, they're probably saying that Andrew Carnegie and especially Henry Frick, they're just absolute monsters and savages. Even here on the bottom says Henry Frick just contributed $500,000 to the Republican corruption fund in New York. So, Americans were not too happy to hear this. And the homestead strike here with more sort of militia being formed up. It's always good to see the U.S. flag and, troops being sent against poor protesters. I suppose an early form of police brutality here, right? If you think about it. America has a long history of just, telling a lot of folks, sit down, shut up, and this is not your time and place, right? We are going to make some money here, whether you like it or not. So, the American dream, people, American dream. Okay, I absolutely love this image because the good old farmers, right? They typically get laughed at, I suppose, especially even today, modernly. They don't really get as much respect as they're due. And so, here in the middle, it says, I feed you all, right? And there's the farmer in the center, right? He's the critical central focal point. And then everyone around him, whether you are working in the railroads, right? You are teaching or doing stock trading. You work in the bank. You work in medicine, in the shipyards, whatever. He feeds them all. He is a central focal point. So keep the farmer happy. You keep everyone else happy. You make the farmer unhappy. Once again, you're all going to starve. So, take your pick. But also kind of moving on into more populist discussions here. So these populists, started to form an actual party, the People's Party, in 92. And so this new sort of progressive group, right, wanted to advocate for many different reform issues, such as, and it just, ranges in a wide host of them, right, such as, a better gold, silver coinage system, better taxation, postal savings, more regulations on railroads because there was kind of unfair pricing by the robber barons to the people, etc. A very important one, direct election of U.S. senators. And so they were, a new party trying to, fight their way against the Democrats and the Republicans, which have solidified their political structure and situation. And so, they were spreading across media campaigns, trying to get more people involved, getting their message across, right? And so they were running for office in 92. And one of their main banner rallying cries was that the nation, the United States, brought to the verge of moral, political, and material ruin by all the corruption and economic inequality. Does that sound familiar to today? Gosh, it does. History really does have a way of just repeating itself in such ways. We have very similar themes and issues today in the U.S., just slightly different contexts and different actors, right? But it's very similar today. Conversations of income inequality, the rich versus the poor, Occupy Wall Street, various underrepresented communities throughout the U.S. Like the list goes on and on. But that the U.S. has always kind of been buckling under this sort of internal rot and greed. So it is our job as Americans to plug up the hole and fix it, right? No one else is going to do it for us. And then one of the candidate for the Populists in 92, by the name of James Weaver, he received 1 million votes. He didn't win, but he received some. And then one of his famous sort of speeches, he said, "I have a dream. A time is foreshadowed when liberty, equality, and justice shall have permanent abiding places in the republic." His words were one of the inspirations for Martin Luther King Jr. later on with his "I have a dream" speech. This is a nice little comparison between back in the day, Trump and Bernie, when they were sort of going at it at the open primaries. in 2016. So definitely a good one for folks to watch. It's from the History Channel. I believe it's a very short one. Let me see how short it is. 7 minutes or so. So it gives you a nice little recap of populism, what it is. It dips a little bit more in the second half into, let's say, more modern politics. But, it does a nice, decent job of sort of portraying all throughout U.S. history. And this is like the steel mills that I was talking about earlier. So a nice catch there. But yeah, it kind of gives a nice progression up to the modern day to really get a honed in feeling of like what really is populism. Who are these people? What are they about, right? What is essentially trying to advocate for the little person, right? Trying to advocate for the average American and making our lives better. Not necessarily just making a few people's lives better in the U.S., in the top sort of echelons of society. So, Democrat backlash. The darn Democrats in the South, always reeling their ugly heads back, right? Alrighty, so remember the great betrayal, the ugly handshake between the Republicans and the Democrats. Reconstruction ended in the South. President Hayes, the Republican, was walking off with his lady, the trophy, the prize, right? And the Lucifero there, the Republican party leader, was standing here. So after that occurred, Democrats have a good footing in the South. They control the South now. And so the Populists wanted to, kind of intervene in that kind of relationship. And so they attempted to tell interracial audiences that they had similar problems in the farming and political arenas. Essentially, the Populists were not racists. So they went to whoever would listen, white or black, and said, hey, we're all in this together. We're all farmers. We're all, they were coming in from an economic argument, right? Saying we're all farmers. We're all, in this together. We all have common enemies. We have to work together. We cannot just, be divided. As Lincoln famously said, a divided house cannot stand. And here, very similar saying, you are kept apart that you may be separately fleeced of your earnings. A nice indication that if you do not band together, they're going to pick you apart and economically just devastate you, which is exactly what they were doing for the longest of times. And so the Democrats here did not like that. The Democrats in the South wanted to keep the status quo, if you know what I mean, with race relations. And so they challenged all of the populists' sayings. They challenged all of them. And they were very scared because of the populist message, which not necessarily was pro-black. It was pro-worker. It was a socialistic type of, populist agenda. Had nothing to do with race for them. But of course, the Democrats in the South, everything's about race for them. And so they're scared of an impending Negro supremacy. The blacks are going to rise up, and our way in the South is going to end, and yada, 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 etc. A lot of hocus pocus, a lot of mass hysteria, if you will. And so the result here was that the Democrats, upon hearing these populist notions being spread to the masses, said, no. We are going to stamp this out as fast as humanly possible. Immediate black voter suppression, stuffing ballot boxes on election day. So even, let's say, if, one of the counties and the African-American population was voting heavily for Republicans, right, and they would win, they stuffed the ballot boxes and the Democrat would win, right? All of these illegal tactics, sometimes even bordering on intimidation tactics and physical violence and intimidation at the polls. And they also went against the populists' message of including women's suffrage, right? The right for women to vote in this country. And so the Democrats in the South had a very, very ugly, tumultuous history. Let's put it that way. And so when we did have the later on 1896 presidential election, between McKinley and Jennings Bryan, all of these issues were at, in the sort of circulation, right? All these issues were at the forefront. But because a lot of the populist message was not necessarily about race or anything else, but it was about economic sustainability, right? The populists wanted for the average worker to have, a good amount of rights and to make an honest living. And so out of these two presidential candidates, the Democratic one, William Jennings Bryan, so he was having slightly more radical views on coinage and silver and gold systems in the U.S., right? And he himself was making the Democratic Party nervous. He is a Democrat. He ran on the Democratic ticket, but he was making the Democratic Party powers that be very nervous. Similar to how, I suppose, modernly, Bernie Sanders made a lot of the Democratic Party members nervous. And so they conspired with Hillary, and then Hillary just karate chopped Bernie's legs out from under him, the poor guy, in 2016. And then we ended up getting Trump. So congratulations, Hillary. Thank you for giving us Donald Trump for 4 years. But, agreed. Anyways, my little side rant aside. Jennings Bryan's radical views on coinage and silver was making people nervous. And of course, then they started to have a counter narrative spun against him in terms of, trying to say, this is supposed to be his face, saying that he is siding with the populists, right? He is on the Democratic ticket, but he is siding with the populists. So he's a snake. He is a snake for the Populist Party. He's a spy. He's not a true Democrat. He is going to eat the Democratic Party and destroy it from within. All of this type of imagery, right, starts to get proliferated, right, throughout the South, especially, and other parts that are going to vote in the presidential election. But as you can see, definitely trying to have a voice against him, right? The good old Pullman strike. So as we are furthering and continuing this type of conversation, another strike, right, just comes into the fray. Workers getting disgruntled, employees and employers at each other's throats. Once again, very similar to the Homestead strike. Corporations and companies are trying to protect their interests and having federal and state authorities come in with muscle to help, put down the workers, sort of mobs. And so kind of showing that big business and the federal government are sort of in cahoots with one another, right? And so this individual did not like this. His name was Jacob Coxey, or Coxey. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that one. And he was part of the People's Party, the Populists, right? So he did not like this. And so he sort of took a ragtag team and marched onto Washington Capitol, right? And part of his message was to abandon the gold standard, print more money to make it more widely available for workers, widely available for farmers, allow for the economy to grow a little quicker. And essentially not have the paper currency backed by gold, right? As a sort of side lecture here, if I can have a sidebar with you all. The main reason, if any of you are curious up to this point, why in the heck some people are talking about getting on the gold standard, off the gold standard. The situation is this. When a currency is on a gold standard, that means it is backed by the gold. So I can bring in X amount of US dollars to the bank and say, I want gold for this. They could actually give you physical gold nuggets, right? Like physical minerals that you could hold in your hand. It's backed by gold, which means the currency is far more stable, does not really fluctuate as much with inflation. So much more stable over time. However, because it is more stable, yes, it does not go down into recessions as heavily, but also it's much more difficult to have like unlimited exponential growth economically. So whoever feels downtrodden in this type of system says, hey, I want to get off the gold standard because I want more money circulated in the US, not being backed by gold, for us to print more income for more money and paperbacks. And so hopefully there will be this sort of more massive spike in the economy if there's room to grow. So that's why they're having this type of debate and argument, right? Today, modernly in the US, after the 1970s, I believe it was Richard Nixon that finally got us off of the gold standard. The U.S. in the last few decades has just been printing money, not backed by gold. It's just backed by a theoretical, ideological idea, right? That the U.S. dollar is valued to something when it's not. I cannot walk in the bank and say, give me gold bars. They're not going to give you gold bars. And so, yeah, today, modernly, our economy can just grow and grow and grow, but also hit low recessions too. It's a lot more volatile. Anyways, so end of sidebar. Just kind of explain that on the side. And so Mr. Coxey's army here, right? Trying... actually, no, this is not Coxey's army. Excuse me. This is for Eugene Debs. So Eugene Debs was sort of, at the same time in conjunction with Jacob Coxey. Also, learning from the March on Washington from Coxey, he wanted to do his own thing in relation to railway unions, trying to go up against them, to unionize, have workers strike back. Federal troops came in once again, similar to Coxey's situation, at the behest of the businesses and the railroads, and the federal troops shut down the protests. The results: Eugene V. Debs, he was the leader of this strike. He was put in prison, and the union was busted up. And so Debs here sort of being the king of the fools, right? The king of the anarchists, if you will, with all of this anti-labor propaganda. But, the poor folks just want an honest day's living, and so the powers that be just did not want to see that. And so they're marching in the streets, they're holding American flags, they're playing music, yelling and chanting, saying, we want fair rights, we want, decent wages, hard, American wages that we can be proud of. Numerous people, different backgrounds, different professions, all came together, right, within the Populists to try to make this a reality, right? So this is a little more of a nuanced discussion on the silver and gold standards that I said a moment ago. Getting into more detail of the gold standard, what it is exactly. That is a currency defined by gold, much more stable type of currency. If you get off of the gold standard, the currency can fluctuate a lot more, whether for the better or for the worse. Folks like William Jennings Bryan, that we recently discussed, the presidential candidate in '96, he was advocating for free coinage of silver, saying also that the gold standard would not crucify mankind on a cross of gold. He was a big proponent of the gold standard, and he, on top of that, wanted to also introduce silver into the equation, saying, you know what, taking us off the gold standard is not the right way. Perhaps we should just introduce silver, so we still have something backed by gold and silver for the currency. It's more stable, but has a little bit more leeway to grow. I think that was actually a pretty decent compromise, honestly. He also asked for a few different things, right? Progressive tax income, banking regulations, worker union rights, all these wonderful, good things. But unfortunately, the powers that be, the Democratic Party members, just did not like his ideas because they thought it was too populist for their own good. And so, yeah, we thank goodness for modern tech and radios and microphones. He later gave a speech on about his very famous Cross of Gold speech, essentially advocating for this combination. Sorry for the audio. Advocating for gold and silver, and sort of the implementation of this sort of combination. A nice little speech is at 8-9 minutes long, and so if you have a little bit of time, the audio is restored here, so it's actually decent audio just to hear his arguments back in the day of why he wants to kind of change things here. And of course, numerous posters and propaganda, right, of him trying to bring prosperity to the United States, financial success, right, to all. Sometimes, with his cross of gold, putting him in the very similar terms of Jesus Christ, and then him here standing, on top of the Bible, a bunch of imagery here. The poor dude, really tried to sort of, give good, decent solutions to the tax systems and the economic issues plaguing the country in the in the 80s and 90s, and some of it fell on deaf ears. But I think thankfully some of his work was saved, so that a couple of decades later, as we started to get more and more of these progressive movements that we're going to talk about in the next chapter, some of his work was incorporated, right? So just to, maybe just say it on the side, it's always worth to push for your ideals and your goals, and things that you want to change, because even if you push the hardest that you can and they are not accepted at that moment in time, maybe someone after you will hear your voice and take up the banner, and then that's the right time, right, for change. So you never know. Always advocate for yourselves. And of course, a Palpatine meme at the end: the Gilded Age, nice and corrupt. Good, Anakin, good. Sorry, I had to put a Star Wars meme in there. But anyways, that is the end of chapter 20. That is the end of our discussion on the Gilded Age. We're going to have the progressive movement coming up next for chapter 21. So thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for next time. See you all later.